Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome. Glad to have you all here. If you are here for Dunte Hector's Is Good Form the Key to Speed and Strength, then you are in the right place. Game something else? Will you hang around anyway? It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good. Okay, I'm just letting a few folks in. We're gonna have some stragglers, so we're gonna start in about a minute. While we're waiting, why don't you in the chat just yeah, pop in and say where you're tuning in from, and yeah, maybe like why you're here. One thing you want to learn tonight. Cool. More folks joining. We got Santa Cruz. Excellent. Welcome, Brian. Who else we got? Where are y'all tuning in from? What are you excited about tonight? We got Seoul, Korea. Awesome. Welcome. And we got Dunte from Denver, Colorado. Excellent. Hey, hey. We've got Quebec, New Zealand, Bogota, Cairo. Awesome sauce. Excellent. We've got the DR. Excellent. Saw some of you earlier today. Appreciate you returning. Hi, world, says Brian. Excellent. We've got Quebec/California. Cool, cool, cool. Excellent. Okay. So we'll probably have some more folks joining us in the first few minutes, but let's go ahead and get started. So again, this is Dunte Hector. We're talking about sprint form. So is good form the key to speed and strength is the title of today's talk. So Dunte and I go way back. He's an S&C coach as well. And yeah, I don't know when we first met. I think we met virtually, knew each other virtually for a year or two. And
2015.
2015, you know the details. Excellent. Is that when we hung out at Nationals together?
That's that time. That is that time.
Yeah, that's when I was in Chicago or near Chicago. So cool. And Dunte has contributed a few articles to our blog. I think he also, I think you started writing back when we were at Skype when we did the training column. So one of the columns for that. I think that's how our working relationship started. And yeah, it's been fun chatting with Dunte on and off ever since. So yeah, go ahead, take it away, Dunte. Feel free to add more details to that if you want, or just, yeah, get started.
Folks, what we're gonna do is dive right into it because I left some room for introducing myself, but Melissa actually referenced a bit that I didn't plan to talk about, which is, yeah, I started interacting with Sky Magazine and then Ulti Results in 2015, which was my first full season on with the broader Ultimate community. I think it kicked off, like, other than our conversation at Nationals, actually because of a comment on a Sky Magazine article called Ultimate's CrossFit Problem, which was a bit contentious, and I was perhaps openly hostile about my feelings about the usefulness of most strength and conditioning protocols for a field sport like Ultimate. And we're going to dig right into that stuff today. So first thing, what we'll call house rules. I'm not going to beg you to wait until the end for questions. Throw them in the chat. Melissa's screening the chat a little bit. I think there's a hand up function somewhere. You can throw that up as well. Unless I know it's already included in the presentation, I'm happy to, depart from the plan for 30 to 60 seconds to get a good question answered. I don't want to leave you hanging. I want you to get what you came here for. But here's what we're about. Is good form the key to running fast? That's the whole thing that we're looking to address. While the original title of the talk is good form, kind of the key to speed and strength, more people come to me asking about speed than they do about strength. So I think it deserves some additional focus. Here's what we're looking to cover. I happen to be the author of a book called Fast Kids Don't Train Slow, The Ultimate Player's Guide to Running Faster. I'm not here today to talk about the book, but a lot of the content here, a lot of the ideas here are pretty thoroughly presented there. So this "Want to be a fast kid" is a reference to how the book opens, which is with how we tend to perceive the folks who are fast and our own options for becoming one of them. Today, we'll jump into the coach. That's me. The story of speed. That's the story that we tell ourselves, the story that other sports coaches tell us, the story that is told by the strength and conditioning community, which I've been a part of for a long time. Then we'll get into the key to speed. If it's good form, you'll hear about it. If it's something else, hopefully it doesn't catch you too off guard. A process, it says the process, but a process for speed development, and then some resources. This is me. I'm Dunte Hector. I got started in strength and conditioning actually in 2010 when my official job was as a personal trainer, but a handful of athletes came to me. I had some really positive results in terms of their on-field performances, but I didn't start with ultimate. I actually started with rugby and lacrosse, branched out into soccer, into football, and then into court sports. Become late 2014, I was contacted by a player. At the time, she was just looking for some guidance on doing her lifting better because she understood the strength training would potentially help improve her performance on the field. I asked a lot of questions about the process that she was following, about the sport that she was playing. And then once I realized that I knew absolutely nothing about ultimate, I asked a lot more questions. And represented on this slide are just some of the teams that I've been fortunate enough to work with. My total reach over the years has probably been about 200 players. I am almost exclusively focused on either the high performance player or the player who wants to be high performance. So someone who's looking to make a transition from whatever level of play they're at now to the next higher level. And the point of pride that I was alluding to before is that that same athlete from late 2014 is still working with me, still trusts me to help with her development. And as a coach, what I value more than anything is that kind of long-term relationship. There has been substantial gains over the years. There have been some difficult seasons, but we're still working together, still making progress. And I'm here today because of the first 5 or 6 questions that she asked me in terms of becoming better as a player. So hopefully you find yourself in the stories that are wrapped up in this speed development conversation, or you at least come up with some questions to make this topic more relevant to you. So here's the thing. The basic story of speed could be really easily and comfortably summarized by this quote from actor and producer Mel Brooks. It's talent. You got it or you ain't. And the way the vast majority of people involved in sports coaching or in strength and conditioning believe is that speed cannot be trained or taught. You're born with it, and that's just what it is. See, fast players in every sport get a lot of recognition for what they bring to the table, for their special treasure, for that secret sauce, that special something that they have that lets them outrun literally everybody on the field. You watch your spectator sport of choice, and if somebody's got wheels, you hear about it over and over and over again. But it gets deified a little bit. Running fast gets talked about as though it's inaccessible to everybody, and oh, how lucky, oh, how fortunate that a person has stayed healthy and therefore can run fast. One of the lines that I heard frequently when I started approaching more ultimate players to support their athletic development was when joking about the game, I would ask, well, what does it take to be great here? And when talking about that person who goes off in the deep field and has to either bat down a disc or get up in the air, it was quite simply, you can't teach tall, which is true, which is fair. There's nothing I can do to make you taller. But when I talked about what people wanted from their training, there was always this reservation, there was always this layer, an implicit belief that, hey, if I'm not fast now, I'm not necessarily going to get there. So can you help me make a better first step? Can you help me move my hips and shake a defender? Can you help me do X, Y, and Z? That all suggested their actual belief was you can't teach fast. I wouldn't be here if I believed that. I wouldn't have built out 8 years of dedicated strength and conditioning work if I believed you couldn't teach fast. And actually, I wouldn't have had any of the results that I had if it weren't possible. So first up, this story about speed is an outright lie. A thing I'll say several times throughout the session today is that speed is a skill. And like any skill, it can be developed. But I really love this summary of the book Peak, which was written by K. Anders Ericsson. It's a few years old now, but it's still a gem. There have been a few cool books based on it that you will have surely heard of. But the short version is, with enough early support, with plenty of frequent, playful competition, with a strong desire to improve, and a bit of obsession to see through the rigorous boredom of daily practice, anyone can achieve excellence in any skill. And that's stated in the book unequivocally, and it runs across domains. He explores in depth dance, which is pretty well codified and has a lot of well-structured rules. He explores playing the violin, playing chess, all of which kind of fit on one far end of the extreme of skill development, in the sense that what good is and what it looks like is really well defined. But he runs it all the way through what being a great business leader looks like, what becoming, say, an expert designer looks like, and a variety of other sports skills. The book is wonderful. It's one of my favorites. I talk about it a lot. But the short version here is speed is a skill. And if you're given the right environment, the right coaching, and you have adequate motivation to stick it out when it's incredibly painfully boring, you can get better at it too. So let's get right to it then. If you as an athlete are asking this question, if you're thinking it for your athletes, especially if you're working with youth athletes, how do I run faster? Is it lifting weights? Is it getting stronger? Is it moving more weight in the gym? Strength is essential to your sport, but it's not so that you can run fast. And, you know, Melissa would have to forgive me for this one, but it's not even so that you can perform better. My argument for strength training is a little different, but yeah, you need it. You absolutely need to do some kind of strength training, and it is essential to your performance in the sport. But I've got mixed feelings about it as a speed developer. Is it track workouts? Well, the way most people are doing them, where you've got repeat hundreds and repeat 200s and occasionally repeat 400s because maybe you hate yourself. There's a lot of benefit to that style of training, and in appropriate doses, it has a high value. But again, in terms of speed development, I got questions. Is agility drills, footwork, ladders, cone drills, those have a place. They do a lot for body awareness. But you might want to think twice if the objective is to make people faster. Is it plyos, plyometrics, jump workouts? Plyometrics are a spectacular training stimulus throughout the strength and conditioning community, though they get abused. So we're gonna have to talk about that. Do they have a role? Maybe. And finally, is it running form drills? Is it the mini hurdles? Is it the cones? Is it the jump rope runs? Is it the high knees and the skips? Look, the thing that makes strength training essential is that Ultimate sits in a really interesting space in terms of sports. What is valuable in traditional field sports has a lot to do with agility, mobility, and power. But Ultimate, despite not getting the same attention as the sports I'm about to name, has a really heavy element of hitting the ground hard, hitting it from high speeds, which shifts you from being an agility-based sport, in my mind, to being a collision sport. Collision sports are typically hockey, lacrosse, football, rugby. And when we talk about strength training in those sports, we talk about armor building. And that's simply making your body more resilient so that when you take the big hit, you're not done for the day. You're not done for the week. You're not done for the season. So I think strength training is essential for every athlete in this sport. But I think that most of its value beyond basic strength comes from protecting you from injury. So ultimately, is that how you run faster? No, speed is not strength. In terms of track workouts, again, if you're doing the long form runs, you're doing the long tempo runs, you're doing the long stride sessions, you're doing the stuff that makes you huff and puff and tired, it has value in the sense that there's a lot of aerobic and glycolytic development, energy system stuff. And it can be used for conditioning when used in appropriate doses, but that's all endurance work. That's all, how do I last longer? And speed is not endurance. In terms of agility drills, you can learn about body awareness and hip positioning and getting your feet up off the ground quickly and not dragging your heels with a lot of agility drills. Some folks who spend a lot of time on agility drills, though, have found they don't immediately or directly transfer to on-field performance. But beyond broad performance, just in terms of speed, footwork stuff is not what's going to make you faster. Speed is not footwork. And plyos. I love plyometrics. They're so high value. But the original definition for plyometrics was about the stretch shortening cycle, largely applied to tendons. When you do a lot of jumps, especially when they're submaximal jumps, so you don't get much rest, they're not really working on the stretch shorten cycle anymore because you tend to compress at the joint a lot more, like you bend your knees more, you flex your ankles more, you bend at the hips more before your next takeoff. That's hopping. That's not jumping in the strength and conditioning sense. And speed is not jumping anyway. So speed is not hopping. And finally, let's get to the point of this whole talk. Speed is not good form. Let's just shut that down now. The reasons are myriad, and we're going to dig into it here in just a second. But the running form drills have to serve a different purpose. They're not there to make you faster. That's where we want to go next. Before saying what the key to good form is, I do want to talk about, or the key to speed is, I want to talk about good form. Viewed in profile, so from the side, you watch this clip I'll play here in a moment of the 100-meter dash, the 100-meter dash final from several years ago. And audio is not important here. The way these sprinters look is almost identical across the board, despite differences in ultimate performance. Now, it's not differences that are significant for you and I. We are not this fast. If any of you are running sub 10-second hundreds, what are you doing in this sport? Honestly, if I were running sub 10-second hundreds, I wouldn't be coaching either. The way they run is astonishingly consistent. If you were to flip over to the women's 100-meter final, the women's 200 meters around the middle of the race, the form looks almost exactly the same for everyone, which makes it really easy to believe that good form is what's essential to running fast. But that's exactly what I'm here to dispel. Now, don't play again. I don't want that. Here's the thing. These people who are this fast all look exactly the same. So there are two ways that you could hypothesize about that, which is one, they developed a great form and that helped them be fast, or two, the fact that they are fast has produced this particular running technique. And that's actually the argument that I would make. What we got here is David Oliver. He was a world champ several times. He was Olympic podium in the 110-meter hurdles. My way back background's in track and field, so most of my examples come from there. But the real reason my examples come from track and field is that there's no other sport that makes speed the single thing you need to be successful. And if I wanted to learn how to build muscle, I would go ask bodybuilders because they're better at it than everyone else. If I wanted to learn how to get really lean, I'd ask them too. If I wanted to learn how to tackle, I'd go to football and rugby. Nobody else can teach me to tackle. So when I want to learn how to run fast, I go look for the best examples from track and field. The thing about David Oliver and the thing about the hurdles is that you have to be outrageously fast to run the 110 hurdles quickly. That's well sub 13.5, but under 13 is obviously better. In the hurdles though, after your initial acceleration, which is coming from the blocks to the first hurdle, these folks have all the same qualities as 100-meter sprinters, but they have less space. to get their feet onto the ground because there's only 10 meters between hurdles, and from touchdown to next take off, they're taking 3 steps. So they're producing all the same forces that an outright runner is producing in less time. And that's really meaningful because this actually gets to where form comes from. What you're seeing on this graph as you move along from left to right on the bottom, which is the solid black line, is foot contact. It's foot contact time. Notice that that whole scale is a single second. If this video plays for the entire 30 seconds, and you've witnessed 1 second of David Oliver running at top speed. It's around 23 miles an hour. He's taking a roughly 5 steps in that single second. Typical cadence for a top end sprinter is between 4.3 and 4.8 strides per second. But what you're seeing on the left is force measured in pounds. This man is 180 pounds. Let's round up to 200 just for the sake of simplicity. That force is peaking out north of 800 pounds. Each individual step takes around 1/10 of a second. So he's producing 4 times his body weight in force in about 1/10 of a second with every step, meaning through 1 foot. The reason all those top sprinters look basically the same is that moving at speeds like that, there's only really one form for running that allows that much force production in that little time. Being fast is what has created these people's running technique. So speed, running fast, is not good form. Running fast creates good form. And that just means that good form is a consequence of proper training and adequate time invested in training. The short version is this: the key to speed is electricity. Every motion that you make, every single movement, is simply the result of a bunch of signals moving from your brain, down your spinal cord, and out to your nerves. But what defines the efficiency of those movements is how fast signals can be transmitted, and that's mostly through familiarity. So if you've done the thing before, your body knows which signals to send and to where, and how well insulated the signal is to prevent loss, to prevent deterioration. I was on a trip to Arizona recently. I was riding my mountain bike in these like desert trails, and pretty much every mountain bike space has a power line that just runs through it because of funny rules of land use here in the US. So I'm riding on sand, which generates a lot of static on its own underneath a 40 kilovolt power line. And I could feel discharge from the line in my hair and on my bars. It's actually super uncomfortable because it feels like you're buzzing all the time. That's an example of loss. Now, there's thousands on thousands of miles of power lines across the country. It would be prohibitively expensive to insulate them all to the point that there was no static electric discharge. But when talking about electricity in the body sense, there's a lot of good science that supports that the way motor skills are retained is that the nerves where the signal is carried get coated in this jelly-like stuff called myelin. And the more you execute a skill, the more jelly the body applies to the nerve that protects it. Because if you do a motor pattern a lot, adaptive mechanisms say that motor pattern must be important, whether for survival or because it's just what's important to you. So that myelination, that insulation, protects from loss and increases the speed of signal transmission. Speed, in this case, running at top speed, which really means applying huge forces in tiny amounts of time, is electricity. And it comes from practicing the skill a lot and building up those neural networks that facilitate transmission. What's really important here, when we talk about speed development, this actually is probably the most critical element. So there are some things that I'll say later that are like, if you only write down one thing, but this right here is if you only remember one thing. Instead, if you want to run faster, you got to understand what breaks up the flow of electricity. Remember, the signals have to move fast and they have to avoid loss. Well, what goes wrong is if you're tired, all of your motor systems are slower to respond to signals because they're using up energy, removing waste product. That burning feeling, the lactic acid that is generated in glycolytic activities, which is the long stuff, the longer than 20-second stuff, the huffing and puffing stuff, slows down motor responses, creates brain fog too. You can't have high-speed signal transmission if you're tired and confused and your muscles ache. Fatigue is the enemy of speed development. It's also the enemy of skill development. It's the enemy of strength development. When we're talking about coordination, which is how effectively signals get from your brain to your muscles and you do the thing that you were thinking about, fatigue is the problem. And the way most people approach strength training, the way most people approach running on the track, the way most people approach their footwork drills, the way most people approach their hopping sessions is that they do stuff until they're tired. I get it. You're in a field sport. Endurance is critical. You know, executing skills when you're fatigued is critical, but we're talking about skill development. If you want to cement the skill of running fast, or you want to cement the skill of throwing a great flick in a crosswind, you shouldn't be trying to do it while you're tired. Practice it while you're fresh. So let's get something that you can put into action right now. A process. This is the too long didn't read of running faster. If all you write down is this, then you'll have an actual workable program for running faster. I would recommend you start with 3 exercises. Single leg hops is the first. Hopping forward, hopping sideways. This is high value for posture reasons. It has nothing to do with footwork. It's about keeping yourself tall and getting off the ground quickly. And if you do that and don't exceed 30 to 50 jumps per session, depending on how well conditioned you already are, then you'll build the appropriate posture for running fast and receiving those forces with short ground contact times. Second exercise would be the lunge complex. So it starts with actual lunges, just stepping out in front of you and stepping across. Any ultimate player worth their salt can already lunge. But what we're looking for with this particular exercise progression is what's called a leg split. If you're standing on your right leg, can you get your left knee higher than your hip and hold it there and be completely stable? That leg split is essential because it represents active flexibility. You need that flexibility in order to run fast. You don't need a lot. I'm not telling you to go stretch. I'm not saying that yoga is the answer to your speed problem. I am saying if you can't get your knee above your hip while you're standing with a straight leg, then you don't have enough flexibility to run fast. Finally, skipping and bounding. And that's a progression. The appeal of skipping is taking those two things, great posture and a leg split, and applying them to a dynamic movement. When you skip really well, you have all the foundations necessary for running fast. All that's left is running fast often enough that your brain gets the coordination right. Bounding is also great, but it comes way later. Lots of folks are doing too much of it. I wrote a short article for Melissa, I think, about jump progressions a couple of years back. And I talked a little bit about bounding. The short version here is keep the volume low. 100 to 150 yards a session is not very much. That looks like 6 by 20 yards. But done really well, that lays the foundations for running fast. 2 workouts are meaningful. If all you're looking for is to get faster, there are other elements to your sport, and that's why I've reduced it this much. This level of training volume is not adequate for a track and field athlete. It's not adequate for a tailback or a wide receiver. It's not adequate for an outside center in rugby, which is what I was. You need more in those particular positions. And so if you are working with, someone who's only ever going to go in the deep field, who you always want to run down the long ball, they're probably going to need more training volume than this. I didn't say this was the answer to all problems, but this is the foundation of running faster. So 2 workouts are meaningful. First, hill sprints. You want a hill that's pretty steep.
Hey Dante, can I interrupt here and ask a
please
quick
do.
question? Came from the chat. So in the first part, when you're looking at those drills, a question came in. When you say a skip, do you mean like an A skip? Any kind of skip will do? What kind of skips are you talking about?
I would start with the kind of skips that you see children do on the playground. Here's why. Any single-legged takeoff into a single-legged landing is adequate for developing this posture and this elastic response. There are a few additional things that you need to be conscious of while skipping. And the ones that matter most are these. First, that when you land, kind of toe to ball of foot, you want to get off the ground quickly. And so in a traditional skip, you make that landing. Let's say you took off on your left leg, you land on your left leg, you make a short step and you take off on your right. That's fine. That step has to be as fast as possible. You've got to get back off the ground. So the faster you get off the ground, the more effective skipping is. That is why any skip will do. But yes, you should ultimately work on building a great A skip, because the great A skip transitions from the quick step, getting off the ground as fast as you can, to actually making a really high quality vertical takeoff and vertical landing before you kick the next foot out for a takeoff into a vertical landing. I explore that whole drill. There's a whole skip series in the YouTube playlist that's associated with Fast Kids Don't Train Slow. And that playlist is publicly available. If you go on YouTube and search for Fast Kids Don't Train Slow videos, they're there. And there's a skip progressions in one of the warm-ups. I think it's warm-up number 2. You can see those skips at full speed and in slow motion. Watch for posture, watch for time on the ground, watch for how the heel behaves. Broadly speaking, don't let your heel hit the ground, and if it does, don't let it stay there too long. As you progress to bounding, where it is left foot takeoff to right foot landing, the forces are a lot higher. If you overcook it on the volume, you can damage plantar fascia and Achilles real fast. As a person who competed in track and field and then sat 2 seasons for Achilles injuries, don't make that mistake. You can't bound every day. Not aggressively, not at high power. As your technique gets better, you can do simpler stuff. But that's why this volume is so low. It's just kind of an introduction to the skill. So get off the ground fast and the skip will do you well. The 2 workouts that matter, again, are hill sprints, a fairly steep hill, and 20 to 30 yards is sometimes even a little long. You have to have your coordination pretty well dialed to do 30 yards up a steep hill. Really, what you're looking for is 7 to 12 steps. Now, that's a lot less than most people try to run during their hill sprint sessions. 7 to 12 steps up a steep hill doesn't get you very far. And you'll notice that I wrote 8 to 12 runs per session. That's not very much volume. If we called it 10 steps per run, then we're talking about a total of 120 steps. The point is skill development. You're not running this hill to get strong. You're not running this hill to be in better shape. You're not running this hill for conditioning. You're not running this hill to get tired. You're running this hill to learn to accelerate. Tony Holler, who runs a training program for track athletes called Feed the Cats, talks about getting triple extension, that's ankle extension, knee extension, hip extension through a straight line body. That's what skipping teaches you. And dragging the toe, which is letting the leg linger behind you a little bit, because most people rush their acceleration. They want to move their feet fast instead of power being applied to the ground. So hill sprints for speed development are short, they're aggressive, and they're up steep hills because it puts you in the correct posture. The second workout, 40 to 60 yard standing start sprints.
Oh, Dunte, hold up. Another question?
Yeah, do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, so this is a great question. What's the appropriate rest between reps for these kind of hill sprints?
Okay. If we're doing real speed development, you'll see it down there at the bottom for one concept. Quality means effort plus rest. Real speed development means the working segment takes somewhere between 3 and 8 seconds. The resting segment is around 90 seconds for something like hill sprints. You can walk down and just kind of mill about for a little bit, to as long as 6 or 7 minutes for your standing start 60s. The way you monitor rest is that first, you should not be starting the next rep with any fatigue. Again, this is about speed development, this is not conditioning. So you shouldn't start the rep with any fatigue, and you'll find that your athletes, there's a lot of variation in how quickly they recover. But the second element is we're trying to minimize what's called neural fatigue. A hard acceleration, a really hard acceleration, especially over a 60 yard, takes it out of you a little bit. You're a little foggy, you're a little dizzy. It usually takes 3 minutes minimum to come back from a proper 60 yard effort. I've pushed this when I was doing S&C practices for Showdown. And the hardest bit of 5-minute rests is that people lose focus and they just kind of drift mentally and don't really stay attached to the form work. One way around that is to add something else in between. After a hard 60 effort, getting people in 2 lines and throwing really gentle and simple throws, working on stepping out for posture and control reasons, helps pass the time, helps keep people focused. On hill sprints, walking down, counting off about a minute, you don't tend to lose people. So about a minute is okay on hill sprints. As people get better, meaning as they get more powerful, as they cover more ground with each step, they need more rest rather than less. So I'll put that out there. So the one concept, and that's what I'm summarizing here for every one of these things, is that quality is how we build up skills, quality of execution, intensity of execution, and that intensity falls apart when you're fatigued. So quality is both effort, how hard you're going, and restricting the rep so that you can go appropriately hard, and how much rest you take. The second aspect of rest here is actually rest between sessions if you're talking about speed development. And in a sport like Ultimate, where you have playbooks to emphasize, you have conditioning to do, you have basic skills like throwing and body positioning, especially coming off of a sideline, it's okay in this sense because you have other things to occupy your week anyway. But if you're doing true speed development, we're talking 2, at most 3 sessions a week. These volumes are super low. These intensities should be immeasurably high. And you can't do that very often, or else you get chronic neural fatigue. And that just means you can't turn it on when it's time to turn it on. So the concept that matters the most is you've got to train under conditions of quality to develop speed and really to develop any skill. I want to pause there. I see some activity in the chat. Melissa, we have another question worth exploring.
Yeah, we've got a few questions. Let's just take care of a few of these real quick.
Yeah.
So there's a question about decline sprints, which you're not mentioning here. So I don't know if you want to talk about that now or at the end.
Super short version, decline sprints are extraordinarily stressful on the body, are contraindicated for a lot of athletes. And with exactly one exception, I've never considered it appropriate for a field sport athlete to be doing decline sprinting. Now, we can go back a long way. We can go back into the early 90s and look at the Charlie Francis training system, which is a book that's in the resources list at the end. Charlie Francis worked with a bunch of athletes. Look, some of them got busted for doping, and I'm not here to endorse that aspect of their training methodology, but they were damn fast. And he did a very good job of taking people who were already fast and making them faster with minimal injuries. And a lot of those principles have been applied in other contexts. So let me start there. In the Charlie Francis training system, decline sprints were on like 1 to 2% grades over 60 to 120 yard distances. And they would do 2 reps every 3 weeks. These were with elite athletes who could handle those kinds of loads, but what he found is that there were a disproportionate number of hamstring injuries every time he tried to ramp that up, whether it was ramping up the frequency or ramping up the intensity at which they did the efforts. They actually did these as tempo runs, as strides, not as full speed efforts. Decline sprints come with a lot of danger. Because the ground is a little farther away from you on every step, that means you're falling from a greater height. What creates all of that force is that every takeoff, you're lifting your hips, and then you have to drop and absorb that force. We're talking about a lot of risks to joints. We're talking about a lot of risks to hamstrings, which are responsible for decelerating the hip once the foot hits the ground. So I don't like decline sprints. I don't recommend them.
Okay, cool. And then there's a question about your YouTube channel, just someone reporting they can't find it, but we'll make sure that
I have that link. I will drop it in the chat right at the end today, and I'll make sure that it shows up in the resources that you will see when you're like signing on 24 hours from now to review hopefully all this great stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Is there one more? Or shall we move on?
There was a question about just a specific warm-up exercise called dribbles. I don't know. There might be some context there and stuff.
I'm not sure what that particular word refers to, so I can't speak to it. But there are lots and lots and lots of good footwork drills that go nicely in warm-ups.
Yeah, okay, cool.
There's a longer form version of this process, both in the resources you'll find for the Ultimate Athlete Project Coaches Conference that you're in right now, and inside Fast Kids Don't Train Slow. The principles, though, are that for speed development in a field sport, so this is now highly specific to you, you just need good enough form. I talked about posture and I talked about a leg split. That comes from a position called the hard Z. The hard Z is when your stance leg, if she weren't running in this photo, you're standing flat on the ground, when your stance leg is straight, when the action leg, the leg in the air, knee is higher than your hip and your toe is up. So that's stand tall, knee up, toe up. If we can practice that posture and make sure that a body can handle it under load. So first you have to be able to do it standing still. Then you have to be able to march through that position. Then you have to be able to hop through that position. Hopping and skipping are very similar in this sense. And so ultimately you can run through that position. If you can maintain and achieve the hard Z every time you sprint, you know your quality is high, you will continuously get faster. Over short distances, those increments for speed are hard to track. There are ways to deal with that. But anyway, the hard Z, so good enough form, is summed up by the hard Z. You need frequent and intense competition. You need a stopwatch. You need a friend. You need to be running down a disc. No one runs full speed just because they want to. They run full speed because they want to win. And you got to find ways to give people that feeling of competition every time you're doing speed work. And then you need consistent rest and recovery. That's rest inside the session. So that's fairly long rests between intervals. That's rest between sessions. So that's multiple days of other activities, lighter activities neurologically. That doesn't mean your days in between speed work are easy. You could have conditioning, you could have intense practices, you could have a lot of difficult stuff. It means that you're not continuously trying to run short sprints and keep getting better day on day on day. But it also means, in terms of rest and recovery, having a plan across the year. Off season is dramatically different than in season when we're talking about speed development. In season, the best you're really going to be able to do is maintain. There's so much running and so much thinking and so many aspects of the game of Ultimate that there isn't space neurologically to continue building the particular skill that is speed, but you can keep it together and then you rededicate in the off season. So again, this is available in long form, both in the resources that you'll see after the live segments of the conference are done. And this is what Fast Kids Don't Train Slow was written about. So if you're really interested, the book is dirt cheap. I didn't write it for the money. I wrote it because I answer a lot of the same questions. And I figured putting together some form information and a few basic training programs would help more people. So I think it's like $8. Go find it. If you want to ask me questions, you'll be able to. But what you got to take away is that speed is a skill. Is good form the key to running fast? No, running fast is the key to good form. But there are a few things you do have to do. You have to build up your posture. That was single leg drills. That was skipping. That was the lunge series. You have to do high quality work. That was the hill sprints. That was the standing start sprints. And you got to make sure that you give the body enough time to build out coordination. It's one of the slowest things to develop. An example. Peak explores this, but more importantly, Malcolm Gladwell in Outliers and Daniel Coyle in the Talent Code explore skill development. This is where the dogma on 10,000 hours has come from. But if that's all you took away from those books, then you missed the point. The point was the type of practice, deliberate practice, that was necessary and what was happening to develop skill. And it was simply that you got great feedback and you put in huge efforts and then you rested and you slept and you thought about it and then you did it over and over and over again. One of the examples to be cited is that nearly every, there are exceptions, but nearly every Olympic gold medalist in a 100 or 200 meter dash was a second or third child. That's hugely significant because when I look at my kids, 2 of whom are 5 and 1 of whom is 11, my 5-year-olds get mad that they can't beat my 11-year-old daughter in everything they compete in. But if you grow up like that and then you enter structured competition, that means you're always getting frequent, playful competition. Early support means we keep putting them in environments to be competitive. We go to the track as a family. We have, Frisbee games and football games and every other thing in the backyard. Finally, that at least for them, the play doesn't look like practice, but when you go to develop skill, truly develop it, it's that it takes hours, days, weeks, months, and on average for those Olympic 100 and 200 meter gold medalists, 10 plus years of consistent practice. to achieve the pinnacle of human capability. If all you're looking, though, is for a 10th or two on your 40, maybe it's only going to take you 2 seasons, but you have to be consistent about the training, about the posture work, about the skill development aspects of speed. Melissa, I want to pause for a second. Any other questions coming through right now?
I just want to shout out that this is amazing. I'm just super enjoying this presentation. Any UAP
Thank you.
athletes
Thank you.
that are in this talk, I mean, you're just explaining so much of, I think this is great. It's just great for people to hear. Obviously, you know, I talk to my athletes about these things as well, but you've explained it so clearly and so well. And I think even if folks have heard it from me, it's great to hear it from you and great to hear it like different angle on all this stuff too. So
I'm glad to hear that. Folks, I love that so much. Folks, I hope you throw some questions up and we're gonna open up for pure Q&A here in a second. One thing I want to point out here is that the bibliography, say, to my book and to my life is incredibly, ridiculously long. I am in what I've called the worst retirement ever, to borrow from cyclist Phil Guyman. Officially, I closed ATX Speed and Strength in 2018. But if I had retired, then I probably wouldn't still have 4 athletes on roster. So I continue to be obsessed with how to make players better, how to minimize the time necessary to recover from injuries, how to maximize skill development, how to balance the demands of complex sports. I love track and field as a competitor. It's a little too intense for me to coach. I actually like that speed has to take a little bit of a backseat to other qualities sometimes in sports like ultimate and sports like rugby. What I didn't talk about today was conditioning. I didn't actually talk to you about strength training. I didn't talk about neural load in any kind of substantive way to help appreciate like what a practice schedule does to an athlete who's hungry to get better. Here are a couple books that I recommend. If you're looking for speed, Franz Bosch is the best. But if you don't have a really heavy personal investment in sports science or have a degree in it even, you might find it a little inaccessible. The graphs in it are neat, the photos are great, and the summaries at the end of each chapter are worth your time. So Franz Bosch is running, and he has another one on coordination and power. I forget the name of it right now. Charlie Francis Training System is a great read. It talks about what types of workouts that he's specifically used for young track athletes, for like college and early pro level, and for folks who are later in their careers. Again, there was a whole phase of Charlie Francis's coaching career where his athletes were known to be using drugs so they could sustain higher training loads, but he actually talks about that in detail. What kinds of risks came with performance enhancing drugs and how he had to manage those risks. I'm not suggesting that you go down that path, but the management had a lot to do with rest and recovery and soft tissue work and calming them down after competition. And there's something to be learned there. And then Travis Hansen's The Speed Encyclopedia. I don't actually know that it's still available like in print, but you can probably find a PDF of it just kind of floating around. It's a great one just for drills and suggested workouts. He does it for field sport athletes. That's football, that's rugby, that's lacrosse, that's ultimate. He does it for dedicated sprinters. And then he looks at people who just want to get leaner because the metabolic effects of sprinting are outrageous. And so the Speed Encyclopedia is a fun read. And then on the other side, for skill development, The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, David Epstein's The Sports Gene is brilliant. That story about most of the gold medalists in the 100 and the 200 being second or third children and taking 10 years, that comes from The Sports Gene. K. Anders Ericsson's Peak is my favorite book. I recommend it to everyone who coaches anything. You teach violin, then you need to read Peak. You coach athletes, you need to read Peak. You want to be better professionally, you need to read Peak. It's for everyone. And then Outliers is highly recommended. And then my book is available on Amazon. It's in print. I actually like the print version better because it has a cool cover that you can't see on Kindle. But and I'm so genuine about that. I keep it near me. So if you go through the book and you decide, oh man, I've got questions. The unfortunate part about closing my training business in an official sense is that the website's no longer functional. And that's why one of you had trouble finding the link to the videos. I'm going to throw that in the chat right now. That's the link to the playlist. The email address isn't functional anymore. The place where all the articles used to live is all gone because when I closed the business and I moved away from Austin, I live in Colorado now. I'm in the Denver area. Someone else took over the name of my business. And since they're still in Austin, ATX makes sense for them, but I couldn't get away from it. Again, it's the worst retirement ever. So Shift Performance is where I write. That's simply at danteh.wordpress.com. It's not a fancy website. I am publishing both new writings and old writings kind of as an archive there. That's also up in the chat, but you're welcome to read along. Some of the older stuff that I've written for various other publications will start to show up. My ideas have evolved. My approaches have evolved, but the principles are the same. I believe in quality. I believe in pointing toward high performance. I believe in less is more. So you'll see that stuff on Shift. And if you want to talk to me, this will show up in the resource that gets published to the internal website after you're done with the live segments of the conference. I've got a Calendly link. You can jump on, grab 30 minutes with me if you want to talk coaching, if you want to talk athlete development. That's not free, so let me be upfront about that. But if that consultation is of interest to you, we can talk about it. Let's go. All questions, all day. That's all I want. Q&A. Let's do it.
Amazing. All right. Thanks. Do you want to stop your screen share so we can see more of your face? And we can see
whole face.
Whole
Frank,
face.
I agree with you. Talent code is so good.
Okay, great. So let's look at the chat. I mean, you also, now that you're done presenting, you can also see in the chat there yourself.
Yeah, I'm kind of scrolling back here.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so we've got some props. Love that you're talking about neurological and rest aspects of speed work. Yep. Thank you. Overlooked. Yep. Overlooked by the mentality of more is better. Yep. Okay. Cool. So do we have other questions? You can either type in the chat or you can, there's one there about curved running.
Yeah, let me run through a couple of these that I see. I'm going to go back to Renee's question about doing dribbles. There is no one drill that is the best. So even if you're doing it wrong, you can probably live without it. That said, what I imagine it is, there's a series of quick hops where your foot is just slightly off the ground with your ankle cocked up. That is really useful for the basic coordination of getting your feet off the ground quickly. I think it works better than like quick feet drills in a ladder because people slap their heels on the ladder. So I don't know what that drill is. If I'm imagining it correctly, it has value. But even if you don't do it, if you really truly focus on posture and going as fast as you can, you'll probably pick up what you need. Anyway, Declan here's got a question. Is it about a minute per 10 yards sprinted? Yes, that actually holds up pretty well until you get to about 80 yards. It also doesn't necessarily work at 10 yards. So if I were doing, say, push-up starts, which are really great for teaching acceleration, I don't need a minute between those. Honestly, do a push-up start where you're really driving for 3 to 5 steps. You'll cover about 10 yards in that time. Settle your brain down, right? It takes 10 or 15 seconds, and then lay down on the ground and do it again. We can actually do a lot of push-up starts. Similar with something that is distracted. So if you did like an underhand forward medicine ball throw, it's like a granny toss, right? You swing the ball between your knees and throw it as far forward as you can and then sprint after it. The ball's only probably going to go 15 yards at best if you're throwing a light ball and you're pretty well coordinated. You could do 6 or 7 of those in a row. The thing to note is for pure speed development, a minute per 10 yards sprinted, and that's a minute of rest per 10 yards at full speed, is accurate. But that rule of thumb was designed for top speed runs, and most people don't reach top speed posture until after 30 yards. So if I were going 40s, so 40 yards from a standing start, really only need 2 minutes, probably, when we're only talking skill development. When you're doing them for testing level, for performance, you need about 5 minutes, and that's consistent with what you've suggested there. Appreciate you, Renee. The neurological and rest aspects are huge. I actually believe this for strength training as well. I'm a big fan of Easy Strength, which is Dan John Pavel Satsuman. As a summary, but Mel Siff's Super Training is ancient now, and it's still so valuable. A book that folks don't think about a lot when talking about neurological training is one from swimming, which is by an author called Jan Olbrecht, Olbrecht, called The Science of Winning. He's talking about swimmers and how they develop great technique under conditions of duress. And he talks about how important rest is, and that the reason that his swimmers are doing 10,000 meters in the morning and at night is simply so that they can spend more time relaxing in between intensive intervals. It's huge. Stuff's great. curved running. Dylan, could I ask you to add a little detail there? If you can come off your mic, that would actually be great. I'm happy to talk directly to it.
Sure. Just some various people, like I follow various people who train for sports. I follow on Instagram, like around the circle on a soccer or lacrosse field. I've seen a lot of athletes doing that.
Okay. Does it provide benefit? It can. Is it essential to getting faster? No, absolutely not. The postural aspects of kind of running through a body lean are specific to when you need to run through a body lean. Pure speed, so pure top end speed. And actually everything I've talked about today is really about yards 30 through 60 in any given effort. Pure speed translates to every other footwork element of athletic performance. And it does that because of posture, hip positioning, and ground contact time. So it's all about putting power into the ground. And when you want to stop suddenly, when you want to change direction quickly, when you want to jump from a running start at least, when you want to absorb force, at least through your legs, top speed running trains all of those things and produces enormous transfer. It's actually why the athletes who are highly capable at high speeds frequently can transition into nearly any other sport or any other role pretty competently. That said, there is a place for dedicated like body positioning work, and running on a curve can add some value there in terms of body awareness. In the same way that ladder drills have value, in the same way that T shuttles and L shuttles and pro shuttles have value, but their value is not necessarily in speed development. It's more about where do I put my foot, where do I put my butt, where do I put my chest in order to move my body through space more effectively. So hopefully that speaks to, is it useful for something? Yes. Is it useful for becoming faster? I would argue no.
I think we had Carlos next with their head up.
Oh, I got like a physical hand. Let's do it.
Like a virtual hand.
It's a virtual hand.
You got a
actually.
virtual hand. I love that. I love that. And then I'm going to come back to this
So
one.
hi, Dunte, nice to meet you. I have actually two questions, if that's okay. Sure. The first one is, how do you mix the speed work and the speed sessions with the gym sessions, and also the training, technical and tactical?
Yes.
Let's say with a team, that do the three of them during off season and in season. So it'll be cool to see how you plan that.
Right. Was there? You want to ask the second one now, and I'll try to address them both.
Sure. The second one is about sled work. I found, I'm also an SNC coach, and I've found that force velocity profiling to find the right sled resistance for doing some speed work for each player. It's been really cool. And I just wanted to know your perspective on this, and if you do it.
Yeah. Let me answer your second question first. Sled work. When you don't have a hill, sleds are awesome. When you have a hill, hills are better for speed development. When you have a hill and you're using it for speed development, sleds are still awesome. Sleds are awesome. Sleds can do two things for you. When the sleds are relatively heavy, let me quantify that. If I am a 200-pound athlete, which I am, then a heavy sled is 30% of my body weight. 60 pounds. That's a heavy sled. That's a sled I march with. That's a sled I can accelerate with, but I'm a trained athlete. That's fine. It's different. But a heavy sled teaches posture. A heavy sled teaches posture under load. And that's the whole thing that we're talking about. For most athletes in field sports, the first 10 yards come up more often for you than the 30 to 60 yard range. And I said speed development transfers to everything. That's why we're talking about it. How to run faster is a hot topic for people. But acceleration is a critical quality to develop. I love heavy sleds for teaching the posture of acceleration. I do that at marching speeds. That's like hit a pose, hold it, get your foot down, drive your hips, hit a pose, hold it. I also love sleds for athletes with back injuries. If you're banged up, if you've torn up your lumbar spine, if you've torn up your thoracic spine, or you've beaten up your shoulders even, and holding on to weight or loading it on your shoulder is not going to happen. I love sleds for developing leg strength. They do the same thing that the lunge does, but they get to be out on the field. And there are some
Right.
athletes who just hate the gym, and the sled can be the answer to that. So yes, I love sleds. Light sleds. So again, let me quantify that. I'm a 200-pound athlete. A light sled is whatever the weight of the sled is. That's usually 15 to 20 pounds plus 10 or so pounds. It's not very much. I love those for falling starts, meaning that I've got some tension against the waist belt. I'm kind of leaning against the sled. It's starting to slide, and then I accelerate. 3 to 8. 8's usually too much for a high-level athlete. So 8 is actually for your weaker athlete. 3 steps, 3 to 4 steps is for your stronger athlete. That gets you to practice acceleration in a way that can't be replicated. And so I don't actually like those for leaning forward. I actually like to lean sideways. So I've kind of got the sled off at an angle behind me. And now I'm working on accelerating at an oblique angle. That's high value for practicing acceleration. I love sleds. First question, and I went so hard on sleds just then that I kind of forgot it. How do I mix all of this into the week? Speed development in the off season. Let's go there first. If you have truly, literally no practices, then all we're talking about is speed, strength, resilience, mobility. It's the stuff that keeps you from breaking when you hit the ground or hit someone else, and basic conditioning. I like to take the Charlie Francis approach, which is stacking up styles of neural load. So neurological load is highest for maximal strength work, for plyometric work, and for speed training, which is also plyometric work in the sports science sense. So I like to do those in the same session. When possible, I like to go in and lift the heaviest available weights and then immediately go do the speed session. When possible, I get it. We're adults. Most of us are not professional athletes. There's not always time to pull all that off, but that's the sequence I like most. If I've got a day where all I can do is one thing, so I've got to lay it out across a week, I like low-level neuro, which would be like lifting. And maximal lifting is different than lifting that makes you sore. Let me be clear about that, but I can't explore that here. So maximal lifting, the next day is true speed work, maybe with a little bit of long speed work, which is that like 80 to 120 yard zone. I either like a day off or an easy aerobic day. I like to put people on the rowing ergometer because it's low joint load. Folks who swim, I send them swimming. You can go on a long walk, but the point is to not overload, stretch, shorten aspects of your body. So no bouncy stuff. So a light day. And then I like conditioning. The type of endurance an athlete needs depends on your assessment, but I like conditioning after that rest day. And then I like something competitive. Playing a field sport game is the best way to go. Obviously playing Frisbee is the best answer, but if you can't do that, a little futsal is good. A little basketball, if you're sensible and you're not going to go roll your ankle, is good. A little flag football is good. Field sports are great because they make you do all that accelerating, but you're having so much fun, you're not thinking about it. And the rest kind of comes naturally. And then people can lay low on a weekend or get another field day in. In an ideal situation in season, let's say you've got, 2 really tactical practices, like trying to get your playbook established, trying to get field positioning established, all those things. I like to do a really high quality warm-up that covers a lot of aspects of athletic development that also has a little bit of strength work mixed in, and a couple short speed reps right there. I like from our warm-ups to have a couple good build-up runs, and by a couple, I mean 2 or 3 that go over about 30 or 40 yards, and then to do 1 true fly run, 1 on each of those practice days. Then you get to the weekend where either you've got 2 practices in a weekend, or you've got a mini camp, or you've got a low-level tournament. Then you just go play. The rest of those days, you're foam rolling, you're stretching, you're ice bathing, you're doing all the stuff that helps you recover. So that's how I like to stack up the week.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah. There's a question here. What are 3 major mistakes in speed training? Oh, man. I went to a speed and strength consortium. That was a neat thing. It was a little conference that a bunch of coaches came together, and it was mostly high school track coaches or football coaches who brought in amazing people. And Stu McMillan of Altus Training Group was present one year, and I just got to sit down and jam with him for a while, which was amazing. Any chance you get to talk to someone who has coached Olympic sprinters, you should. And I did. I picked his brain for the better part of 90 minutes. And what I loved about that conversation, it was wild. He actually asked me, well, what do you think about developing people who are not high level athletes and making them fast? And I was like, this is a world-class coach. The coach who was with Andre DeGrasse, they separated for professional reasons, contracts, money, I'm sure. He's worked with some fast people and he's asking me my opinion about speed development. A few things stand out from that conversation, stuff that he shared, stuff that I shared. Here's what it looks like. The number one biggest mistake about speed development is trying to do all that stuff that I put on the slide and calling it speed development. Lifting weights, even when you lift maximal weights at low reps in appropriate ranges of motion, that ain't speed development, man. So spending too much time in the weight room is the wrong answer to getting faster. You can make an athlete faster doing truly absolutely nothing more than runs upstairs occasionally. And I'm talking the long ones like stadium stairs, runs upstairs and some hopping. That's all the strength work that you need for speed development. You need strength work for other things. So you actually have to learn how to balance the strength work for other things with the amount of freshness that's necessary for teaching someone to run fast. So that's the number one, spending too much time in the weight room. Number two, too many jumps. I'm skipping and I'm hopping and I'm doing hurdle hops and I'm bounding and I'm doing box jumps and I'm throwing medicine balls and I'm doing all these things because all these things, man, plyos are so great. Plyos are amazing, but they are quite possibly, when done correctly, the most stressful training stimulus that you can apply to an athlete's body. Plyometrics, a true stretch shortening cycle, hit the ground, get off the ground, applies more force in less time than you can consciously produce under any conditions. Doing too many jumps will break an athlete down and it'll tear them up in ways that are really hard to recover from. An Achilles tendon injury, I might be able to get you back on the field in 3 weeks. I've done it. A partial or a full tear, I can probably get you back before the season ends if it happens early. That doesn't mean you're going to be in great form. It just means you're going to be able to play. Realistically, we're talking about 18 months for proper tendon healing. Too many jumps breaks athletes. So those are the biggest ones. But the third one, and this one's actually funny, the third one is too much ego. And what too much ego usually turns into from a coach's perspective is like the wrong kinds of competition. You got to know your athletes. You got to know what fires them up. You got to know when to tell them to calm down. And a coach who's getting good results out of athletes who gets fired up about it, wants to run a few extra sprints, like kind of showing off either to themselves or to another coach who's watching. Athletes pick up on that. I spent a lot more time holding back the teams that I worked with in terms of training volume than I did pushing them to do more. And that was in every aspect of their training. And some of them called me out for it and they thought that I wasn't giving them enough work. And maybe for that individual, I wasn't. You end up making some compromises when you're working across a whole team. But every individual athlete I work with, if you were to talk to them, they would tell you, I spend a lot of time telling them, no, trim a rep today. No, skip that last set. Like I'm asking for live text messages during their sessions. And it was like, I ran that last one. It felt so-so. And I'll be like, okay, scrap it. Run a stride instead. Run a 70% instead. Do a build-up run. Scrap that fly run. Don't film it. Putting you in a competitive condition means you run fast. You run as hard as you can. But if you're not equipped to run fast that day, then I want to take away the film. Don't let anybody, run a stopwatch on you. Don't have them throw the disc. Just work on your technique for a second. Hold athletes back. And that takes suppressing your own ego because you want to see them look awesome every training day. And instead, you just got to sit down and trust the process. So those are the three that I would say. There must be some limits of speed development. How do you know when you're reaching the point of diminishing returns? Okay. Yes, there are limits. There are biomechanical limits. There are neurological limits. But as far as anyone can tell, no one's reached them. So let me start with that. So if you were a pure speed athlete, meaning you want to compete in track and field, you want to compete in the 100 or the long jump, they're actually physiologically exactly the same. It's going to take you 10 years to get to even near the upper end, the 92, the 94% of what you're probably capable of. That assumes that in those 10 years, you only have 1 or 2 major injuries, that you're training 3 to 4 times a week, and that you have good coaching. That's a lot of assumptions. Most people don't have that. And that's why I say virtually no one reaches those limits. Because that's in a sport where you're only building that quality, elastic power. And I'm talking about 4 training sessions a week for something like 38 weeks a year for 10 years to get to almost the best you're ever going to be able to do. The trouble for most people is that we have competitive goals. We have a season where we want to perform, and then we have other things that happen in life, changes in our schedules, changes in family dynamics, stress levels, poor sleep, illnesses, work projects, all kinds of stuff that can derail you. You can continuously get faster for a very long time. So the point of diminishing returns, though, you're going to make most of your gains in your first 2 years. Like if you've never done any kind of focused speed development work, power development work, you're going to make most of your gains in the first 2 years. Here's what that looks like. I don't have my data on hand. It's stored somewhere on this hard drive, but I had an athlete, we were running fly 60s. These were 60 meters. And the fly section that I was measuring was 20 meters long. World class over, well, not world class, like national class in a track and field over that distance is going to be sub 2 seconds. That means you're going 20 meters in less than 2 seconds. Like that's fast. That's fast stuff. Most of the athletes I worked with were sitting in the like 2.8 to 3.7 range, if I'm being really honest. Some were damn fast, and you could tell on the field, like they were running like 2.4, 2.45. I had an electric timing system, so I went out to the hundreds, 2.45 over 20 meters. I had an athlete come in at 3.2. I don't remember what the 100th place was, at 3.2, and we worked together for about 18 months. In the first 4 months, that 3.2 got to like 3.0. Again, we're talking 3 seconds. So that's very, very nearly a 10% improvement in the first 3 or 4 months. And that 3.0 took 6 months to get to 2.9, and took most of the rest of our time together to get to 2.81. That was the best flash he ever ran. Now, that's over 20 meters. What does that actually translate into? That turned into her best season in her 8-year career playing Ultimate. So it's not a huge improvement. So you get a lot of gain in those first 2 years. After that, let's see, if she were still at 2.81 and we had continued working together, I would have been just like fired up if the next year got her to 2.71. And if the next year after that got her to 2.65. So it's going to drop, and it's going to keep dropping. But hopefully, as speed improves and it no longer becomes your most important element, you go work on other things. Tactical skills become more important. Field positioning becomes more important. Knowing your playbook better becomes more important. Like understanding your contribution to the team becomes more important. She wasn't a track and field athlete, so trimming another 10th off of her 20-meter fly wouldn't have had that much on-field translation. She went from slow to okay. But slow to okay is huge, because now she can be in the places that she needs to be to receive the disc. So yes, there is a limit. We just don't know where it is.
Amazing. I think that, let's see, someone had their hand up earlier. Frank, did you still have a question?
Hey, what's up? Yeah, I really appreciate this session, and I appreciate the talk about ego and fatigue. And as a youth ultimate coach for many years,
yeah,
and the whole like, we lost a game, we're all gonna do 40s, like 540s across the field and take our shirts off, and like that stuff is just like hilarious in hindsight, but also like just really awful for their speed development. So
yeah,
I appreciate the especially around the neurological ability to take on these pathways when you're fatigued. So that's really great to know. I'm in Seoul, Korea now, and there are lots of hills, but there are not a lot of field spaces for people.
Yeah.
And I have a good friend, she works with NFL athletes, work with like Russell Wilson, and she came to one of my practices. She's like, okay, those 3 girls, when I was coaching underground, she's like, those 3 girls need to work on their push, like the foot to power push. And she's like, I'm going to come back next week. I'm going to teach you some drills that you can do. And I was like, cool. And then I was like, and then she's like, got busy and she couldn't come. And I was like,
dang.
Drills were, I know hills obviously are a big thing, but how do you help people to get that push, like that really like hard push? Like what are the good drills for people to do?
I'll give you 3. They're my favorites. So the first, sleds. You know, I appreciate that question from Mr. Vegas, because sleds are fantastic, and you can usually find a sled that works on concrete or that works inside a facility or on turf. Get a sled. Like that's where you start. When you're working with youth, I don't know if you are anymore, but when you're working with youth, I don't like to load them posturally. It's hard enough for them to maintain good posture, and if you put a weight or a strap right around their waist like that, they just kind of fall apart. but they tend to get it right in these two situations. So these are the other two drills. The first is the scramble start. There's a whole series of these. Lateef Thomas did championship track and field or something like that, some $100 DVD program, and it's great because it has a bunch of videos of these. So a scramble starts look like laying on your stomach on the ground, and coach blows a whistle or claps, get up to your feet and go, but make sure you don't go longer than 15 yards. If you do that, they're going to push. Doing rollover starts, so lay on your back, blow the whistle, get onto your belly, get up and go. Fantastic for that. Bear crawl starts, so you're in hands and feet with your knees just barely off the ground, blow the whistle, they go. Those are fantastic. All of those get you into the triple extension posture if you're strong enough to do it. So I made the note about youth. Pretty much anybody under 12. Some people are spectacular, some people are freaks. I wish my kids were this freakish. They're pretty good, but they're not this good. Some people can hit triple extension posture every time, younger than 12, but most can't. And that's okay, don't look for that. Instead, look for full knee extension and a high knee, like a big split. So the other knee being high up in the air. If you get those two things from a kid, they're on the right path. So scramble starts and sleds are spectacular. And then the last one is Gray Cook of Functional Movement Systems talks about feeding the dysfunction. What we're looking for triple extension is for the hips to be completely open, like the top of a deadlift at the high point of a jump. So what you do, you get the second athlete to put their hands on the hip bones, so they're kind of resisting, or you can use a band or a towel or a shirt or a long jersey, whatever. You put it around their hips and they're now applying resistance. This is only for marching. Don't have people sprint like this. But for marching, because that band is trying to break the hips to make you hinge, they tend to extend into the band. And now you just work on getting the knee up, getting the toe up. They're hitting great posture. You do like 20 yards of marching for each athlete. Do that twice, and then have them do a scramble start, do a 15-yard start, do maybe 4 or 5 rounds of that to teach what that posture really feels like. That usually gets you there.
Awesome. Thank you. Super helpful.
Absolutely. I see a question here, and I know we're running a little long. So
Sorry,
I'm going to take this
really
last one.
Answer everyone's questions, but yeah, so we'll do one last one, and then and then I gotta prepare for the next.
I understand. Look, I love that you folks are asking these questions. Truly, you can send me an email anytime. I will talk about speed development all day. If you're looking for specific applications of coaching, like that turns into a coaching call. I've got a link for that, but I will happily field questions pretty much forever. This last one is breathing patterns during sprinting. Oh, this is good. How do you manage your breathing? If you're doing top speed work, nobody's thinking about their breathing is the short answer. Vern Gambetta wrote some good stuff on breathing. Boo Schexnayder also wrote some good stuff on breathing during sprint training. And the short version is that a lot like maximal lifting, most of top speed sprinting happens under conditions of Valsalva. So you're basically bracing the abdomen, you're not really breathing. If you're exhaling, you're not conscious of it. If you're trying to think about your breathing while you sprint, you're falling apart. That's not true over 120 yards. So greater than 12 or 13 seconds. So that's someone who's damn fast. Greater than 15 seconds, obviously. Breathing does become relevant because it's how you now manage fatigue and like metabolic products and all that. The short version there is build up your aerobic system, do your long sprints with minimal fatigue, meaning maximal rest between sprints. 3 by 150 is a really popular track workout. And I don't mean for field sport athletes, I mean for track and field sprinters. For a 100-meter sprinter, 3 by 150 is a really, really hard day. But they take 10 or so minutes in between. You'll figure out your breathing when you do a session like that, and you won't have a choice. So you can't do a whole lot about breathing in short sprints. When you're on the field, you really need to breathe after the thing you did is over. You need to learn breath control for when you're resting. And talking about recovery is a whole separate thing. It's wonderful. So on that note, I've got to wrap it up. Thank you so much for these questions, to you folks for tuning in. I saw a few had to drop out. So if you see this recording later, I saw you, I appreciate you. You can email me. You can find me on the blog. I am available professionally on LinkedIn. Like, I'm out there. I'm not hiding.
Excellent. You're allowing yourself to be found again. That's great.
I went underground, guys. I'm back.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Okay, yeah. So yeah, again, Dunte, just want to thank you for your generous, you know, time. We really appreciate you. For all of you here, you know, if you want to review some of the stuff, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of resources thrown out. You can watch the replay. Again, those go live 9 a.m. Eastern tomorrow for the talks that were today. And if you're a member of the Coaching Game IQ Classroom, of course, you can find all that stuff in the website. That will be there maybe tomorrow or by the end of the week for sure. So, so yeah, that's where you can find all the stuff and all the links. Yeah, so that's great. So we're gonna wrap it up, and then yeah, get yourself a snack or, you know, a beverage, and then come join us in a little over 30 minutes for our next talk on how to help your players throw better. All
Oh,
right.
there's a request for an email. Let me throw it in the chat before we're done.
Oh, yep, do that.
There you go.
Okay, great. Excellent.
All right, folks. Thanks so much. I'm gonna sign off. Good luck to all of you. Have an awesome year.
Okay. All right, bye everyone. See you soon.